Good afternoon. This is afternoon Central European time. I'm speaking from Warsaw, Poland. So good evening, China. Good morning, America. I have still 10 days to make your mind to choose the right man as the leader of the US and the global statesman to assist us in directing the developments in the future in the right connection. Translator, of course, is not able to spell my name, which is Kołodko, despite I've published over 60 research papers and 5 books in Chinese language. So I will deliver this brief keynote speech on China and the future of globalization. My concern is basically long-term processes, and from this perspective, I'm taking a careful look how China is behaving, how it is taking part in the process of globalization, and what implications it may have for the future. China is the greatest winner of globalization thus far, so no surprise that China is a greater supporter for continuation of globalization for the future. Globalization has many faces, but on economic ground, my definition of globalization is that this is the historical, longer than our lifetime, and spontaneous, neither managed by a White House or Politburo of China Communist Party, by United Nations or whoever, if not even a chaotic process of liberalization and integration of thus far separately to the extent performing markets, national economies into one interconnected, worldwide, global economy. What happens here depends upon what has happened somewhere there and has the consequences for another place of our common interconnected, intertwined world economy. But the problem is that even before adventurous policy of the current president of the United States, there is plenty of xenophobia, pluralism, unilateralism, protectionism, anti-globalization emotions and sentiments, the political globalization was lagging behind. We still do not have a good working mechanism of policy, of politics coordination on a global scale. And here I put a lot of trust into contribution of China within the United Nations system or G20, which actually is very passive recently during this very challenging period of time. So during these recent years, China was growing, as we know very well, much faster than anybody else. If we will compare just this decade, 2019 against 2009, Japan is 14% in real terms on purchasing power parity higher, European Union 17, Russia 20, United States 25, India 92, and that is important message, and China 108%. China has doubled the GDP again. So my viewpoint is that China is already for a number of years the largest economy in the world because I measure it and I do compare on the correct foundation that is purchasing power parity. From this perspective, last year prior to COVID-19, China was already slightly over 25% of global output gross. If European Union, still including Great Britain, was slightly less than 21, and United States only 19.5. And now the COVID-19 calamity, this turbulence is changing the picture against the very negative processes we observe in the world in favor of China even more, because China is the only country meaningful in the world affairs which is growing modestly, but still it's a positive. And everybody is in a recession, deeper or shallower, but anyhow. And if we measure, according to the IMF and the World Bank, October World Economic Outlook forecast, how the things may change, are changing this year and next year. By 2021, the Russia's economy will be miserable 14% of China, Japan 18, India 36, 1/3, and the mighty US is going down from 78% of purchasing power parity last year, 2019, to 77.0 in 2021. Of course, it must have not only economic, but also geopolitical consequences, and it does. But we are for a number of years in beyond GDP economy reality, which calls for beyond GDP economic theory upon which must be based the beyond GDP growth policy, and especially social, economic, and ecological long-term development. Sometimes we hear from the leaders of China that it is the time of not quantity of growth, by quality of growth, that the fastest doesn't mean the best, and etc. So, but we have to look beyond GDP. And from this perspective, if we take a look for next 10 years, what has been discussed recently, including President of China via video at the United Nations Annual Summit, I'm referring to Sustainable Development Goals aiming for 2030. One of the critical goals is elimination of extreme poverty. Unfortunately, because of pandemic, it is gonna to increase. It's supposed to be brought down to 7.9% of population of world, but it will increase to over 9%. But China stays the course. It's very likely that by end of December, there will be not extreme poverty, according to the World Bank definition of $1.9 per capita, which is a great achievement of China. And it has geopolitical consequences because the other countries, South Asia, Africa, Caribbean region, Latin America, they do observe progress of China, and they are trying to learn the message. How it is possible that the country which was poorer than India only 40 years ago now has income significantly higher, 3 times higher per capita purchasing power parity than India, and there is still plenty of poverty in India. And extremely poverty in China has been eradicated by the government policy supporting the growth and development, which is more since recently, only since a couple of years, inclusive. So what we have to give much more attention in the future to discuss less GDP per capita, even on purchasing power parity, but to pay much more attention to Human Development Index, Inequality Human Development Index, where China is doing against the backward of the world relatively good, but still not as, it is not as impressive as far as progress is concerned as the case of growth in traditional measure. China is just on the position 64th in the world. So 1/3 of the world is ahead of China, 2/3 of the world are beyond China, with inequality adjusted Human Development Index. Just China follows Costa Rica and Moldova and is heading is ahead of Mongolia and Thailand. To put it in perspective, US is only 28, and Poland, which is extremely interesting, you know, we are 27th. You can believe it or not, but from the Inequality Adjustment Human Development Index, my small great country, of which I was 4 times Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, is doing slightly better than the United States. But now we have plenty of problems, and China has also plenty of problems when we go beyond GDP. And we do observe, I mean, is it Mexico or Indonesia? Is it Tanzania or Ukraine? How China is addressing the issue. One issue is inequality. It's completely unsustainable. China's success will not hold if the case of inequality will be not addressed in the proper way. At least I do know from my friends in economic and some in political circles that there is full concern about the challenge, and the policies are aiming to this end. But inequality is a price China has paid for this tremendous growth in terms of GDP over the last 3 or 4 decades. Second, this is aging, which is much more difficult to challenge, especially in the shadow of the aftermath of one-child policies and so on. Already in 10 years' time, the population of China will cease to grow and will start to decline. And at the same time, it will be aging. The dependency ratio will deteriorate. Well, it must be somehow solved the problem by artificial intelligence, robotization, automatization, where China 2025 and other Chinese programs are investing a lot in R&D, already something between 2.3 to 2.5% of GDP, which is causing an envy all over the world, but that will be the problem. And then the environmental problem. It's not for me to judge, but it is we did welcome statement of President Xi Jinping last month that China is going to be neutral from emission of warming gases, carbon dioxide by 2060. So that is 10 years later than we have declared it in the European Union, but this is the commitment. I want it to be the commitment, not a commitment, but it must be proved, if not year after year, say 2 or 3 years, after 2 or 3 years, that China is on a track by restructuring the economy, shifting to renewable resources, etc., to prove it that China is taking care not only on her own environment, but also on the contribution to fighting the climate change or warming the climate in the world. So now there's plenty of talking and discussion. What about the future of globalization? I just defined globalization as an economist because it's also a cultural, technological, security issue, ecological one, and so on. There's plenty of talking about win-win globalization. Sometimes we are joking in the West that win-win may imply 2-0 for China, which definitely would be not welcome. But I'm not here to give an advice, but I would be happy to listen more often from my Chinese colleagues and from Chinese leaders talking about inclusive globalization. And we know by and large what inclusive globalization does imply. And globalization to survive, since it is good for raising of efficiency of capital, labor productivity, must be most inclusive. Otherwise, it is doomed to fail. Take a look how much of protests, street demonstrations, how much in crisis is liberal democracy all over the world because of extractive character of globalization. People are angry, they are fighting against globalization. Is it Santiago de Chile or streets of Paris, other French cities with yellow velvets, etc., because of misunderstanding. They blame this failure of neoliberal policy serving enriching the few at the cost of many of globalization, which is not to be blamed for growing inequality. The culprit is supposed to be shown to the policy, which is failing to manage sharing the fruits of the growing economy in more equitable, fair way. So China has to prove that it is in favor of inclusive globalization and that Belt and Road Initiative, this great infrastructure program, is an instrument to this end. Because otherwise there will be the suspicion that this is the instrument to another end, that this is Chinese dominance in the global affairs, at least too much an influence on part of the world, especially Southeast Asia, Middle East, Africa, to lesser extent because of geopolitical and influence of the United States, Latin America. We know very well how much some countries of Africa, Middle East, South Asia, Indian Ocean region were driven recently into debt because of participating in the Belt and Road Initiative. It has to be proved that it is indeed win-win policy. And we do observe what is going on in China and how China is meeting this challenge, especially over the last 4 years when we do have this unintelligent, irresponsible, unprofessional policies and politics of President Donald Trump, which is of the paramount importance of the global affairs. It is not a domestic issue how they run the country. You may not pay attention to what we do in Poland, but we have to pay attention to what you do in China and what they do in the United States, etc. So I'm from European Union. I was very much at the helm of Polish economic policy when we brought Poland to the membership in the European Union in 2003. And I do appreciate that we are integrating deeply and so on in the European Union. And I think that European Union is behaving with a much greater dose of common sense during these turbulent times of COVID-19 pandemic, trade war, second Cold War. Something has been started just by incident, something can be started deliberately by the United States. We must be very careful. And I think that China in the future, going toward inclusive globalization may count, should count for European Union, which is responsible, accountable. European Union is not United States in these difficult, challenging years, but of course we don't want to be in the European Union anti-American. We are trying to be a kind of go-between, and I think that in geopolitical and geoeconomical game, China must take it very much into account. Because otherwise, China is the loser. China is gaining so much in economic mighty already on purchasing power parity. Each fourth dollar, or if you wish, RMB, is delivered by 1.4 billion hardworking, well-managed, more educated, equipped with proper technology. But as far as soft power is concerned, China is losing. I have the recent research of Pew Research Center. What is the public opinion about China? Just simple question, favorable or unfavorable? And in some important, everybody is important, say the more important relatively countries in the world, unfavorable in Australia, 81%, in Germany, 71%, in Japan, 86%, in France, 70%. They don't like China. Why? Well, because very many of them, they never been to China. They don't study China as you do, as I do. They follow the media, they follow the gossip. If they read the Western papers, not the Chinese one, etc. And they do read what is written over there. But it is very important because in developing countries, to which I am referring in my works as emancipating economies, and I wish China will do the same. Don't say about emerging markets. Emerging market is a very neoliberal approach. You, China, is an emerging market for the American and other Western, Japanese, South Korean, etc. investors and speculators on the financial markets. You know, we are just emerging and delivering the opportunity to make a profit for the others. No, we do emancipate. We are catching up and developing as an old term. Okay, we can call it this way. But in this emancipating economies, is it Nigeria or Brazil? Is it a smaller country, say like Montenegro in Europe or Paraguay in South America or Laos close to China in Asia? The elite, the professionals like us, we do read. We do read the economists, the Financial Times. Somebody takes a look into the New Yorker, and you can hardly read anything positive about China. This is the soft power. It's a very big challenge what to do, you know, how to influence the opinions, despite in this emancipating economies, people may have a good opinion about China and China behavior in the world scheme, but they are under very big influence, including myself. I follow BBC on a regular daily basis, and I'm a regular reader of The Economist. You can never almost read anything good about China over there, and you cannot balance it by another volume of Xi Jinping president's book on governance of China, because that is not what the people in the West or in the emancipating economies care. So I'm an economist, so I'm not in a position to speak about soft power, but I would pay a much greater attention in the future because China is the game changer. And globalization is irreversible, but to make it smoother, less conflict prone, we have to make it more inclusive. of course, first things first. So we'll see what will be the outcome of the election in 10 years in the biggest country of so-called liberal democracy. Hopefully, it will be such a result of this election that there will be resetting of Sino-American or US-China relations, and that will give also some boost for WTO again, for World Health Organization again, for the United Nations, for G20, and so on. So therefore, we cannot discuss about future of globalization without discussing the prospect of China, including the monetary one, which we are discussing here. It's a long shot. It's a long shot. Yeah, RMB will become reserve currency of the world, but never number one. It will be number 3 in the 4th decade, not in the next decade, which starts in 2 months, but in the 30s, gradually, slowly, it will replace first Great British Pound and then Japanese yen, and will become the 3rd after American dollar and European euro reserve currency. Euro will stand the course, the challenges, will enlarge soon to other countries. That is, Bulgaria and Croatia will join euro. That will be 21. In the second half of the decade, of the 3rd decade, sometime between 26, 30, I think